very kind introduction, and let me just start off by saying what I'm going to talk about. I think I was asked to talk about leadership and governance, and I think the best way for me to approach that is to do it by talking about my time as mayor, and then I'll talk a little bit about the governor's race. Sort of to start with who I am, I was born in South Dakota, in Sioux Falls, and my parents grew up on farms in Illinois, and my dad went to service and then college. When he got out, he got a job with IBM, which people always say I've been moved, and so he moved around a little bit as a kid. And I eventually ended up in a small town in Massachusetts for my 6th through high school grades. The city's name is Gardner, and it's 60 miles west of Boston, up by the New Hampshire border, and it's in an area of the state where you have old factory cities, old factory towns, where the towns dating back to the 19th century all had sort of specialties. So next to us was Winchington, which was Toy Town. Athol was down the road, which was Tool Town. Leominster, which is Plastic City, and then Gardner was Chair Town. And so, as you would guess, the biggest industry there for many, many years, and it's not true anymore, was furniture making and chair making. That industry, when I was a kid in the 70s, was not doing well. Factories were closing, businesses were moving south, moving out of the country, or just ending their existence. But remnants of it still exist. When I was young, Gardner was probably 18,000. It's probably down to around 16,000 now. But it was a great place to grow up. And to sort of add to all that, we had the world's largest chair outside of my high school. We frequently climbed on that on Friday nights. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I went to Columbia University for college in New York City, which was a big transition from Chairtown. Enjoyed it immensely, majored in political science and history. And then when I was graduating, I came to the conclusion that the world needed at least one more lawyer. And so I decided to go to law school. And I received a lot of encouragement to apply to Vanderbilt. So when I got in 1978, I moved to Nashville. And so when I arrived in Nashville, fell in love with the city and enjoyed law school. But about a year into law school, I met a woman named Ann Davis. And she is a whole lot smarter than me and is a Nashville native. So it's kind of an old story. We fall in love and go through a 2-year process of having what diplomats would call frank and open discussions about where we're going to live after we get married. Me arguing for Chairtown and she arguing for a dynamic, growing Nashville. And I live in Nashville, and, which is in many ways the best thing that could ever happen to me, because it's been a great place for us both to have careers. My wife has been a lawyer. She's just helped start in Tennessee the Southern Environmental Law Center, and just recently left that job. But we've been able to raise our kids in Nashville, and it's a wonderful place for them to grow up. I have a son who is a lawyer in Nashville, and I have 2 daughters who will graduate from college this year. And then on Valentine's Day this year, we had our first grandchild, a little girl. So Nashville's been great. When I got out of law school, I joined the public defender's office. I did that. I was interested in trial work. I wanted to go to court. I wanted to appear in front of juries. And so to me, it was just a wonderful job. Not only did I get tremendous experience, I really felt that the more you put into the job, the more you were able to improve your skills, the more you were getting out of it. But the thing that really impressed me about the job was this satisfaction I had from feeling like I was doing something helpful, that I was helping people every day, whether it's giving somebody quality representation, representing them in a trial, or whether it was helping people with drug or alcohol problems find treatment for their problems, or helping people get a GED so they could change their lives. the work was very meaningful. It gave me a broader understanding of the city and a broader understanding of issues related to poverty. I also got a pretty good awareness of the importance of education, something that had always been important to me and to my family. But you know, when I represented people, probably 98% of my clients were high school dropouts. And of my juvenile clients, you know, most of them were leaving school when they were 12 or 13 years old. And nothing good could come from that, and you could see sort of the painful results of some of those decisions or that being allowed to happen. So I did that work as an assistant public defender up to 1990. Then I ran for public defender to run the office. Was elected in 90, re-elected in 94 and 98. And then in 1999, Bill Purcell, who Bill and I were assistant public defenders together in the 80s, he got elected mayor. And so he likes to say that we met in jail. That's how we met. But Bill became the mayor, and he wanted me to leave the public defender's office and become the city's lawyer, which is director of law. You run the law department of about 35 lawyers, and you're involved in the day-to-day sort of issues of the city. And that was a great experience, learning how the city operates and all the different issues that it confronts. And then in 2007, when Bill was not running for re-election, I was close to 50, I think. It just occurred to me that you know, I was kind of interested in running for mayor. I've been working in the city, working in all parts of the city as public defender and law director, and I had some ideas how we could improve the city and move it forward. So I decided to run and entered the race. And there were already 5 serious candidates in the race, so I got in January of '07, the election was in August, and just sort of to try to bring this home in terms of where I stood. Sometime in March or late February, a paper that no longer exists in Nashville, the city paper, did a online poll. I mean, totally unscientific. You just go online, you vote as many times as you want, and then published it. And so the poll comes out, and I'm dead last. And not only am I last, I'm like down below 5% in terms of people who are going to vote for me or even heard of me. So one morning after that poll came out, I have a vivid memory of coming down for breakfast before I go out and campaign, and my wife is there with my middle child, Frances, and she's probably 14. You don't really think about politics this way, but you know, you think about a young teenage girl, you know, they don't even want to be seen in public with you, and here I am plastering my name everywhere. And she's listening to our conversation, and we're talking about the poll, and there's really not a lot of good things to be said about it from my point of view. And I look over at her, and she's getting kind of more and more nervous, and finally she gets up and walks over to me and says, Dad, you can still get out of this. You can still drop out. Luckily, I didn't. I went on to win in September, and I became the mayor of Nashville in September of 2007. And so what I want to talk about is, you know, how I approached that job. And you know, I had been in government, I had thought something about government, had been a manager in the sense of running 2 offices, the public defender's office and the legal department. But one of the things that I think I tried to do was to have very clear priorities. And as I involved in this governor's race, I think that is still a real important thing to do, because priorities do a couple things. First, they let the people know what you stand for, and lets them know what are the issues that you want to work on. And I think it's real important, whether you're running for office or whether you're serving in the office, that you talk about this, and it takes a lot of repeating, a lot of talking to kind of get it out in the community what's important to you. It's also important in that, you know, people sort of understand then when you're making decisions why you're making those decisions. And it helps you make difficult decisions when you're in office if you know what you think is going to move the city forward, make the city better, and the things that you want to work on. So for me, and what I talked about during my campaign and what I talked about for 8 years as mayor, that I always said the 3 pitches we have to hit every day are number 1, public education, number 2, public safety, and number 3, economic development. And I would say, in my mind, all 3 of those things were connected, because you weren't going to have a safe city or good economic development unless you had good education. And you weren't going to have good public education if people felt unsafe, they didn't feel safe at school, they didn't feel safe going home. That the safety of the city was paramount. And basically, for those political science majors here, and I know there are a few, I mean, that's fundamentally why governments were created to begin with, was to ensure that everybody would be safe, to make sure that everybody would feel protected. And I also felt that economic development or economic opportunity were really key, because if you want to improve education, it costs money. If you want to have good public safety, it costs money. And if there are other things you want to do, it costs money. And so you needed, and I still believe this very fundamentally, that you always need to have a strong private sector that is producing jobs, creating opportunities, setting up a situation where people can advance themselves, where people can improve their families' lives, where people can hope that their kids will want to come back and live in the community, and then have the tax base and the prosperity that allows you to make the decisions and do the things that you want to do. So to me, that was always very fundamental, and you couldn't advance a city if you didn't work on all 3 things at once. So that was my outlook. So what we did while I was in office, we worked on economic development, and there were probably the biggest factor I had to face early on as mayor was that about 8 months after I took office, not because I was elected mayor, the country goes into the deepest recession it's known since the Great Depression. This was when everything locked up in the economy, the capital markets froze, large investment houses were closing, we had the huge problems in the housing market, and so all of a sudden everything changed. Unemployment went up to 8–9%, and nothing was happening. And so that knowledge about priorities became really paramount to me, because I knew that we had to make tough decisions about the budget, because we had to keep the budget balanced, we had to keep the city moving forward. And so I felt that we had to make cuts. I didn't think we could increase taxes, because it's absolutely, in my mind, unfair to tax the families and businesses and unbalance their books to balance our books. We had to make the decisions about where we're going to cut. So I wasn't going to cut public education. I couldn't do what I wanted to do for public education, but I wasn't going to cut public education. I wasn't going to cut public safety, and I was going to look for ways in which to increase it. And I wasn't going to stop working on economic development, because those are the things that move us forward. And so we ended up having to cut most other departments 15 to 20%, including my own. We did the same thing in the mayor's office. And I think, to me, that was the right approach. And so what we did is we started working on these issues, and over time, in terms of working on economic development, which I mentioned its importance to me, when I first took office, one of the first issues I confronted was the fact that the national predators were being sold. The first owner was selling the team to buy another team in Minnesota, and the team looked like it was going to be sold to an individual who wanted to move the team to Hamilton, Ontario. And so there was a big movement in Nashville and amongst the fans and others to try to find local ownership for the team. And that was done. Local people stepped up to buy the team. And then to make that work, we had to renegotiate the lease, because they play in a facility, Bridgestone Arena is owned by the city, it's built by the city. And so that exercise really took about the first 6 weeks of what we were doing. And it's funny now to think back to that time, because the big issue that was on my mind was, and I think on a lot of the people of Nashville was, can this team ever be viable? Will people ever in Nashville, Tennessee, go to hockey games at a level that will make it work? And it turned out it got pretty darn viable, pretty darn quick, and now it's one of the hardest tickets to get in Nashville. I felt it was important that we work real hard on business recruitment, that we go out into the marketplace of businesses in this country that either were already located in Nashville or not located in Nashville, and persuade them that this is the right place to stay. So, over the course of 8 years, we had tremendous success, and it really started showing as the recession was coming to an end. But we recruited Service Source, which has its own building downtown now, Asurion, which is one of the fastest growing employers in Nashville. We worked with Lowe's Hotels to move their back office, their office functions from New York to Nashville. We recruited Warby Parker, the eyeglass people, moved part of their business to Nashville. LifePoint Medical, which owns hospitals around the country, moved to Nashville. UBS came down and again put their name on an entire building, the financial services. Bridgestone, which is North and South American headquarters, are located in Nashville. They were looking to move, and they were looking all over the country, and so we worked hard with the state to make sure they stayed in Nashville, and they're now building completing right about now a large office tower in downtown Nashville. And then we worked with the music industry. We created something called the Music Council, which was to make sure that the music industry did not feel we were taking them for granted, that they are such a huge part of Nashville's economy in terms of tourism and the number of people who are employed in it, and it's such a great thing for Nashville, because when you stop and think about what does the music industry involve, it involves creative people who have talent, whose capital as entrepreneurs is their ability to write a song, to produce a song, to play an instrument, and those are the type of people you, as a mayor, you want in your city. So the Music Council worked in a variety of ways. It was a public-private partnership working together to make sure that we were doing all that we could to promote music, to help the music industry flourish. We actually created affordable housing for artists in downtown Nashville, and it was a big success. And actually one of the things we were able to do was get Sony to move a portion of its headquarters to downtown. But probably the biggest investment we made during this time, and this is during the depths of the recession, was to build the new convention center, the Music City Center. I felt when I was running for mayor that it was absolutely essential that we do more in tourism and hospitality. I thought that the city, we had a convention center that had served us well. We had paid for it entirely. But it was about as big as the convention centers in Peoria, Illinois, and Fargo, North Dakota. I mean, it was not a convention center that would allow us to compete for the majority of the convention business in America. We could compete for, somewhere around 20%, and then with the new center, we'd be able to compete for much, much more. And so I ran and said I was going to, champion build this thing, and then the recession happened, and everybody said, well, you're not going to do that now, are you? And to me, it was the exact right time to do it, because the city needed the jobs that would come from a $500 million plus construction project. It needed the economic shot in the arm, the energy. It needed the peripheral development that would occur because of the convention center. And it needed to do more for our tourism industry. And so we worked hard to get it through council. We got it through council. And it opened a few years later, and it's been absolutely a tremendous success. One of the things that when I look back at that time, it was the right time to build it, because if you built the same building now, when all the costs of money, of labor, of materials would be so much higher than they were then, it would cost $50 to $60 million more to build the same building. So those were sort of our big economic development projects. I mean, one other I'd mention, because I'm very fond of it, is the work we did at Hickory Hollow Mall in the Antioch through the southeast portion of the county. Hickory Hollow was like a lot of ring suburbs around cities that were built in the 60s. By the time I became mayor, they had big vacancies within them. They were not as attractive as shopping destinations for people, and something needed to happen. And so we worked out a deal where we bought a good portion of the mall, and we converted that into a great public library. We converted it into a recreation center, a great fitness center as part of our park system. We built an outdoor park. We did a public-private relationship with agreement with the Predators, where they built an ice rink, and they actually run the ice rink now for the city. And so that helped solidify that neighborhood, but also brought, I think, more prosperity. In terms of public safety, I mean, one of the things that came out of the recession was there was obviously efforts to stimulate the economy. There were more federal grants, there were more federal projects being financed, and one of the federal grants that was available was a COPS grant, which would mean that you could get up to 50 officers with federal money, and you would employ them for a couple of years under the terms of the grant. And then the agreement of the grant was that you couldn't let them go. I mean, you had to keep those positions. So you kind of go into it with your eyes wide open. That's meaning you're adding 50 full-time employees to your police department. And if you decide you can't afford that in 2 years, you have to pay the city back, the federal government back, all the money that they gave you. And so we applied for that grant. We got the full amount of 50 officers. And that was important to me because one of the things I thought was so important was we needed to get our police department up to full staffing, and then we needed to add more officers. So we were able to add 50 officers at that point to our police department. And so it became the largest police department we ever had, and then during the course of my time as mayor, we added probably another 100 officers, so somewhere a gain of around 150. We made capital investments in police in terms of building two new precincts. We built a precinct in Madison, sort of the northern part of the city, where you not only had a new precinct where there never was one before, but you had a crime lab there where Nashville could do its own DNA, fingerprints, all the forensic stuff we could do ourselves and kind of speed up the process of that. And then we replaced or renovated two others, the downtown precinct and the west precinct. We invested in domestic violence, which I think is an extremely serious issue, and I think is part of any city's desire to see violence go down in the community. We created an advocacy center near the courts that handled domestic violence cases totally, and it was separate, a safe place for women to go to, had child care available. And then we began to build on Murfreesboro Road a family justice center where all sort of issues related to family, whether it be child abuse, domestic violence, a safe place for people to go and for all the resources to be available in one building. And the results of this was, and you know, there's a lot of reasons crime happens, there's a lot of reasons crime goes down. And you know, you can take credit for some, and you never know what the other factors were. I mean, there are things such as demographics. I mean, there's sort of a high crime period. If you have a bulge of younger people, you're probably going to see more crime. If you have a drug phenomenon taking place, which you know we went through in the 90s with crack cocaine, you're going to see higher crime. But I also think if you give the police the resources they need, you give them the personnel they need in a city that was growing very rapidly, you're going to see results. And so we had, during my time as mayor, particularly during the middle years, we saw our homicide rate go down as low as 40, 42, or 43. I mean, those were as low as any rate in 50 years. And I think that's important for us to do. And then public education, which to me is absolutely the key thing that we needed to work on. National schools were looking at partial or complete state takeover when I got elected. There were lots of different issues confronting our schools. Lots of schools that were not, you know, failing to do their job of educating young people. I ran on the idea, and my vision still would be that what you want is you want your schools to be a plus factor for the city, that if people, young couples deciding where to live, firms deciding where to relocate to, you want them to make the list of attributes and put public education on the plus side. And so, you know, we worked with the schools to do a variety of reforms and programs. We invested a lot in capital investments to build new buildings, improve buildings that were run down. We did things, probably the favorite thing I worked on as mayor was creating a program called Limitless Libraries, where essentially we said that we would break down the walls between our public library, which is part of the general government, and our school libraries. I mean, school libraries have been kind of forgotten and not well funded and not maintained. This sounds like it's made up, and it's true. When we started sort of going through the books in the school library and getting rid of the ones that were not relevant or not being used anymore, we actually came across a book that was entitled "Will Man Walk on the Moon?" And you know, it was a little dated. So what we did was we said that, you know, the schools and the public library, which we have a great system, would buy books together, and we would make available to every public school student in Nashville the books that are in our public library. And if a student wanted that book, it would be delivered to them within a day or two. If they wanted music, if they wanted movies, they would get it. And we wanted every kid to get a library card, and it turned out to be a really popular program, and it's now in every school. We, as part of that, we started public-private partnership again, and during a recession, public-private partnerships are probably the best way to get anything creative done. We look to refurbish or redo a few every year our public libraries, our public schools libraries. To me, the library of the school should be the most inviting, most interesting room. And so we would put in a totally renovated space that we thought should be more like a Starbucks or a place where people would be comfortable, where they would want to go, to be the coolest room in the school. And that has worked out well. It's going to take time to get to all the schools, but that is probably the program that gives me the most joy, and certainly the thing that makes me very proud. So that's the approach I took. I mean, so I talked about those three priorities for 8 years, and it really got to the point where I could say, you know what my priorities are, and people knew what they were. And they kind of understood, whether they agreed or disagreed, why I was making these decisions and why we were handling things in this way. Another part of being a mayor or being an executive that it's a little more difficult to plan for in terms of, other than establishing your priorities, is emergencies. You know, one of the things that occurred in Nashville during the recession in 2010, May 1st, we had the Great Flood, we call it. It was the worst natural disaster in Nashville in decades. We had 11 of our citizens died. We had $2 billion of damage to private property and hundreds of millions to public property. And so the story of the flood to me is always the response of the people of Nashville. I mean, people helped their neighbors, they helped complete strangers. Churches helped people who, part of their congregation, they helped people who never set foot in their church, and businesses did the same. In the weeks after the flood, we had probably 24,000 volunteers on the street getting the city back up on its feet, and I think we recovered faster than most cities would. But